Alrighty. I think I know what I'm doing today. All right. Okay. What are we doing today? Okay. So we're going to have the chocolate almond distribution situation. Good. So they're still here. I did not eat them. This is incredibly tempting, I have to say, because I eat enormous amounts of chocolate. And God damn it, that was hard. Next time I'll buy a second bag. Okay. So we'll get to that. That'll be a piece coming later on. Thank you. Good. And I'm going to finish off this 3/4 versus 2/3 thing. Clearly, as you know by now, 3/4 is the imperial forces, and 2/3 is the rebellion, the plucky rebellion. All right, so we'll get to that. We'll see who wins. So this is just a nice little piece. I'll link to it later on. Moore's law, right? So we're talking about scaling in general. So Pixar is just a nice piece about it's on Wired. Yeah, the people, some of the characters involved with building it, not these characters, but the actual humans. How they started thinking about making these kinds of movies in the 70s, and realized they just absolutely could not. But they got some, got an envelope out, because you always have an envelope, and turned it over and figured out when, like 20 years from now, with this Moore's law business going the way it is, we'll be able to make it. And it was a good estimate. Yeah. So that's just a nice piece of prediction, if you like, or kind of looking into the future. So that worked out. We've been talking about what I think is a terrifically bad mistake and everyone piling on top of it, right? True believer type situation. This is a good one that just happened. We talked about it in office hours a little bit, but maybe you haven't seen this. But this is a pretty messy business where, due to some treatment of an Excel spreadsheet with some there were a number of things that went wrong, basically. It appears that, the idea that austerity brings growth is possibly not right, based on evidence, right? Based on evidence from countries that have implemented such plans, right? So a positive number went to a negative number when you put all the right pieces in. And that's, right? It matters if it's 2 or 3% increase. That's a difference, yes. But positive to negative is a big change. That's qualitatively a different game. This piece is by my wife. She's a journalist, and she worked for Bloomberg News for a long time. So she's writing for our friends at Microsoft now, actually. So she does that from home. But I won't really show them to you. But the comments are they just abuse that. Yeah. Anyway, she used to write for AOL. So I think these might be the YouTube people growing up. They move on to other things and comment about them. Anyway, so that's a good example of things gone wrong. The lying part, I think that's why I had that Armstrong piece in there. I was trying to build a little, cheat to win story. It happens in science. You get funding if you tell your beautiful lies over and over again. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Let's see. So this is a fun thing. Maybe I'll get to this later on. But I mean, I could point to some of the points. So this is from 10 years ago, scaling in world records. Really nice. So this is speed for in the Olympics and so on, over running races and swimming. So it's running and swimming, and it's men and women from left to right. But you see a really nice break in scaling here, right? So the speed is going down, of course, as distance goes up, but there's kind of a break. And I think we looked at this. It's something like, well, what's this? This is more like this is more like this. So this is 100 meters. That's not right, is it?
That's time.
That's time. Yeah, that's time. This is speed. So it's not really showing there, right? So that's actually the 100 meters there. That doesn't work very well because of the standing start. It's the 200, the 400, the 800. This must be the 1,500. That's 1,000 because that's a weird distance. Yeah. Okay, it's 1K. 1,500 in the mile. Yeah. So 800 is really when you start to get some kind of strategy involved, right? So you can sit at the back a little bit and so on. It actually becomes a little bit strategic. Obviously not really in the 100 at all, or 200 or the 400, you just go, right? But you start to get that, and clearly much more as you go up. But there is a so this is an energy system sort of story, right? There are the things that we have that run for maybe 10 seconds, things that run for maybe 3 minutes, right? We burn all that stuff up, and then we're into aerobic material. All right, but swimming has that same break as well. Swimming, which unfortunately I have to do all the time now. I'm trying to make it interesting. It's interesting. I believe it is interesting. Yeah. Don't get injured is what I'm saying. All right, so there's some fun things. Let's get back to the really fun stuff. Scaling, yay. So I put a little thing up for Boston. So geometric argument. So I'm just going to skip through this again. We had the madness of this network story with impedance. That falls to pieces. There's no two ways about it. Then we have the story where there's no impedance and we're just talking about geometry. That had some problems because of the whole elephant with 10 times its size in tanks for the blood. That was just does not work out. And so then this is an argument that took about 10 years to come up with. It's incredibly simple, and you can see what's wrong with it if you want to, or how you might adjust it. But basically, looking at any kind of family of shapes in d dimensions. So big D is the ambient dimension. So for river networks, it's 3 dimensions, but they're 2-dimensional shapes, if you like, the basins. Whereas blood networks fill a 3-dimensional space, and they are of 3-dimensional objects. So that's a big deal. So little d is the dimension of the volume that's being filled. Big D is the ambient space. All right, so we had things about cows and so on. Good ways and bad ways to do this, right? So this is a terrible network. This is a good network. And we had this idea that if we can just, there is some complicated network in here, but we'll just take out each individual little path and draw them separately, right? So there is some, if you like, blood being used by this, that goes through this capillary, and the nutrients, if you like, or whatever, the oxygen and so on, is diffused out from there. So you can imagine it's all scrambled here, but traveling there directly. All right. And so we have this observation, and this is work by, again, Gassner and Newman. I got this to fit properly. That shows, yeah, I mean, in this case, it's the T and the Boston T and the commuter rail network, that real spatial networks where you have kind of a source, a hub, literally the hub, for Boston, you do pretty well, right? You do pretty well with a fairly efficient kind of structure. It's, there aren't huge, crazy loops going on. Fair enough. It all makes complete sense. All right. So then we had this optimization story. Basically, the minimum network volume, the best one, right, is going to be proportional to the integral over the shape, and it's just the distance from the heart directly to, so you put the heart at the origin, directly to the sink, and we have some density of sinks. This turns out to be, you can mess around with this, you get an integral that's just a small finite number that's independent of volume, and you have these two pieces. You have the density, which again could change, right? So the density of sinks in a mouse could be different to the density of sinks in an elephant. I know you're all watching this very carefully, right? So, and then this other piece pops out here. So we have volume. So that comes from the dx, if you like, right? There's a volume that you're integrating over. So you're going to get that part. The gamma part comes out of what was really a square root here, the Pythagorean distance piece. And it's the maximum exponent, right? So if we're in 3 dimensions and it's an isometrically growing system of shapes, it will be a third. Gamma max will be a third. All right. So we want to think about that. Sorry, I jumped that. So all of this is some number that depends on the shapes. Doesn't matter, we can get rid of it. But basically, there's density, volume to the 1 plus gamma max. And the problem, so we can see what happened with the Banava method. They can't, but you can if you want, which is rho, they have rho as a constant, essentially, right? And gamma max for them, growing isometrically, will be a third, so they get a v to the 4/3. Bad plan, okay? Very nice. I'm really excited. I almost ate some again. All right. I hope people will share. All right. So let's see. So that's our story. That's our story from this ridiculously simple argument. We're not worrying about impedance. We're not worrying about how things combine. Blah blah blah. It's okay. So if scaling is isometric, as I said, then gamma max in general will be 1 over d. D is the dimension of the space that's being filled, little d. And then, so we'll call it slash, network slash iso. For this, we have v, 1 plus 1 over d. You can do whatever you want to make that. So, and in general, right, if we have some gamma max as some allometric, I mean, it could be just gamma max. It's going to be 1 plus whatever that allometric scaling is. So a very simple thing to say straight away is that, and this is a good observation to make, is that the isometrically growing regions, right, same volume, but the ones that are maybe growing like elongated sausages or something, right, are the network that's going to, you need to supply this guy is going to be much smaller eventually than the network you need to supply this guy, right? So the isometrically ones are more efficiently serviced, if you like, which makes sense, right? I mean, it makes sense. So instead of having your cow be a nice big sphere, all right, we'll put some shapes in. Okay, we have an udder. Okay, that's our cow. There's some limbs and things, but we neglect them because we're physicists. Or dairy producers, I suppose, sort of extraneous pieces. And then we have our other cow. It has a udder still, and it has some, but it's more of a pancake cow, right? So this one's network system is going to be, for the same volume, is going to be, as we keep scaling up and up and up, this one's going to take up more room. It's going to be more of a burden to service that. So that should, in principle, kind of feel right, okay? But it's a good thing to know. So that actually, so that has something to say about McMahon's theory from the 70s, which was that there'll be these, you could argue that this odd scaling comes from allometrically growing shapes of organisms. Not really true, okay? So that's a big deal. So there's some part that I'm not, maybe I'll show it, but it's about the surface area as well. So we'll get that. All right, so blood networks. So blood is expensive stuff, for an organism to maintain. So you expect that, that we're going to have a pretty close lower bound. We're going to, right? And it also can't be that, as we've seen rather obviously, the scaling can't be greater than volume. So that's not going to happen. So, but for the networks that we have these two dimensions have to be 3, right? The dimension of the space that's being serviced and the ambient dimension are the same. They're three-dimensional things. Right? 3-dimensional cow inside a 3-dimensional space. The cow does not care. So, and then very reasonably, blood volume has to scale linearly with, it has to do this. It has to do this. It might have some variation, but it cannot scale sublinearly. Otherwise, you end up with a cow with no blood in it. Or superlinearly, and we end up with our elephant that's in trouble, right? So that's it. And that, someone took the time to, I think this is Stahl, this is in the 60s or 70s, took the time to do those estimates. Possibly at the expense of various organisms, right? So, so very reasonable. All right, that's what you would think. So for that to work out, so the volume of network, this is scaling is proportional to volume, and we have volume on this side, so you can get rid of the volume to the 1, that's going to go away. And you can see that we actually have to have the density decreasing. The density of sinks that you can service has to go down, right? So these bigger and bigger organisms, if we're thinking about organisms, the density of sinks is decreasing. So that connects nicely with the idea that they're running at a slower rate, right? It's just built on this plan, right? We've got the whole vertebra thing going on, and the heart in the middle. Just we have every variation on that. But given that we don't have multiple sources or something like that, we just have one, then this seems to be the story. Very, very elementary geometric story. And there are all sorts of little things about what happens with limbs and I don't know. But we're assuming spherical objects, or at least isometrically growing ones. So the best thing you can do, right, once you have this minimal network, is have this situation where the density is decreasing. So you could also think about, well, what about cities and so on? And cities have very different profiles, right? So New York City, if you keep going out, has a very strong decay. LA is very flat. So in some sense, LA is more like a bunch of cities stuck together, which I think is reasonable. You could imagine this density profile. You could treat that in a, it's not true for organisms. We have to have our capillaries all through us, right? Otherwise, it's variation depending on the part of the body, but you couldn't have that your peripheral areas have much less than the center, but that's what happens with cities, for example. So that's a whole other story, but we're thinking about, given a particular organism, it has some density of sinks that's relatively uniform. Okay, but I'm just trying to say you could generalize this to say, okay, there's the heart and the density of sinks goes away from it, decreases, like a city, for example. If we're talking about that, all right. So cities would be, so cities have the properties of river networks, right? Because they're 2D things, but they live in 3 dimensions, so you can build up, right? Which we do. So that gives it room to grow, right? It gives it room for the volume of whatever we're talking about there, cars, people, something, to grow up, dogs. Okay. So let's have our nice little argument, right? So we have, if we're just sitting there, we've got all our sinks. The metabolic rate has to be, that's an argument that's being used over and over. It's proportional to the number of sinks. So we have, well, that's proportional to, volume is proportional to mass. And then we have, the fact that this guy is decaying as volume to the minus 1 over d. This comes in here. We're still in, let's put it in a reasonable dimension. So d equals 3, 2/3. So instead of this d over d plus 1, right, the magnificent, so you can see the numerology that's going on here, right? That's just a little bit of tweaking around. You get d over d plus 1, and that's 3/4. This is d minus 1 over d, and it's 2/3. So, dear. All right, so, got to tell you about it. All right, the Stefan Boltzmann law, very nice thing. Came out of physics. A lot of trouble with this one, right? That's the so-called ultraviolet catastrophe, which is, I love coming up with good names, right? All this crazy quantum business, but one of the upshots was this idea that if you have a black body, so a shape, if you like, some volume, and there's just simply radiation going on, then it depends on the temperature of the system. That's the this is the amount that you'll see coming out, right? This is the rate of energy being lost. So that's well known. So there are 2 pieces in here. We have temperature and surface, right? This is a constant, a physical constant, but surface area is in there. Very reasonable. This is why the guys with the funny binoculars will come and find you at night, right? Because you're giving off heat. Not that any of you, right? Okay, but you can. I guess we're in Vermont, right? This is what you guys when you go out hunting for turkeys or something. Yeah. It's not really fair, but I guess it's fun. All right, so give the turkeys infrared. Okay. So there's a very rough estimate. You can do some things because there are some measures of surface area, right? So going back to the day, you have people like counting how many clicks like a paintbrush sort of thing would take to cover a cow, right? So you paint your cow. It's a bit tricky to figure out surface area, right? You get the pelt situation, but and we give off heat kind of unevenly and all sorts of things. Fair enough. Okay. But there is a sort of a rough estimate that it does scale, yes, again, as mass to 2/3, just like any good isometric thing. And we actually, we can get out some numbers, right? There's a 10 to the 5 popping out the front here. This is based on you put in ambient temperature. Very different things happen for organisms that are hibernating and so on. Maybe estivation as well. This is a good thing to do too. But so anyway, and this is the measurement if straight out of that Heusner data, doing a fit again for mammals less than 10 kilograms. We even get the prefactor right with this, again, glorious back of the envelope kind of calculation. Okay, so that's not bad. This is not. Okay, radiation takes up some portion of how much energy is lost by an organism, right? There's sweating and so on, and other things that go on. But it's a decent amount. As you go up through effort levels, it changes, especially for people, right? We sweat. Dogs stick the tongue out the front and eject heat through that rather extraordinary mechanism. Anyway. Ridiculous, right? This is just sitting, this is pretty spectacular. Okay, all right. River networks, let's think about those guys. So these are now collection networks rather than distribution ones. And we have many sources, which is just, so they're distributed, if you think of rain falling somewhat evenly, then they are evenly distributed across the landscape, regardless of the, disregardless, if I may say, of the basin size, right? So here the density of sinks is something is not scaling with basin size. Right? Rain is falling, and of course rain is patchy and complicated and so on, but we can assume all that away in our good physics way. So we're going to assume that the density is roughly constant over time. So this guy is just a constant. And we have the d plus 1 over d. This is our original thing. And d is 2 in this case, because it's a two-dimensional surface thing. Right? So 2 plus 1, we'll do a little math, is 3 over 2. So now we have a bad thing, right? This looks bad. This is our elephant situation. Volume of the network is scaling as volume to the 3/2. Slightly terrifying situation. However, that's OK, because rivers get deeper, right? It is a two-dimensional thing living in a three-dimensional space. So that is good, right? These things are really, volume is really area here, of course, right? So this is the area of the network, the total area of the network if you look down on it. And so it's area to the 3/2. So it's all very OK, right? The two-dimensional surface is living in 3 dimensions. Yes? Totally exciting? Totally exciting. It's great. It's great. Makes sense. So just a few more pieces, and then we'll be liberated from this madness. You will be. I'm not. I'm not. So Haxler, we talked about this. So you can get these fantastic data sets out now, satellite data, for heights of continents and so on, and figure out all the network patterns. And a reasonable thing you could do then is say, all right, so you have, this takes a lot of work really, but you have some big basin like this, and then there's some sub-basin in here. And at this point, you talk about that, this is point I, this is the area of I. All of that drains in. And if you imagine that rain is relatively falling constant or sort of on average over time, then that's a sense of how much flow is on average coming through there. There's all sorts of other complications, but that's not a bad story. So you can argue, and this is something we're not going to do, but the volume of the network, so we have this Hack's law story, so the main length, the mainstream length in the basin proportional to area to the power of h. This is just this observation, and we talked about it before, so this should be a half if we're just in boring dimensional analysis world, meters squared, whatever you want. And there's a observation originally that was about 0.57 or something like that. So we have magic. But you can go through this argument again, and it's using Horton-Strahler things. You don't have to worry about that. The volume of the network is going to be connected to the area of these basins with this 1 plus h. It feeds into here. So that h is sitting there, and we have 3/2. We have this 3/2 scaling, so of course it says it's a half in this kind of optimal sense, right? This very basic optimal geometric sense. So that's why the Banavard piece works here, right? Because rho is a constant here. It doesn't work for organisms because it doesn't seem to be true. And so this is a plot from their work. And you see, so this line here is not a fit. It's just, this is 3/2. It's ridiculously good. These are for 3 somewhat small regions, but with good resolution. This is this story of getting this kind of an estimate of the volume of the network, and this is the area of each basin. So, working fantastically. So the irony of it all is it kind of undermines the whole thing and shows that they're isometric. Basins are isometric, right? Which seems to be true from the data. So we have this story here. I think I have one more plot, so it's boring. And we have one more plot. This is what I did. So it's the same kind of thing. This is your area. This is your kind of estimate of water volume, or something. It's proportional to that water volume. So big networks from the Earth. And these are usually at a mile resolution or, right, yeah. That's it. I mean, it's insane. It's totally insane. But, people still run around with all sorts of stories about this, and I'll show you some of it. So I produced that work somewhat, I mean, just despairingly in some ways, I have to say. So then we have a paper in 2010, right? Keeps going. 2010. This is Banavart. Now they've joined up, right? So there's Banavart and then some of the quarterologists are kind of on the same team. There's some splintering and whatever, but crazy thing. There's about 10 authors, I think, on this one. They have some great quotes, like it's been known for decades that the metabolic rate of animal scales is blah, 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 blah. So these people have never looked at the real things, but they take my thing and tweak it and say something about capillaries, and they get their beautiful 3/4 back. So that's crazy. So that's sort of the Empire Strikes Back. That's that paper, which was a great movie, but a terrible paper. So the analogy is not so good. So I've got some people who know what's going on. This guy, Chengizi, is a very interesting guy. He's written a lot of fun things. But so that's what he said. He has this little story about someone who spent 5 years trying to prove, it's apocryphal probably, but some killjoy bastard somewhere else published a paper and said there's nothing, that your thing doesn't work. And so that person drops out and probably, he's probably making my cappuccino right now, which is pretty rough. And then he goes on about my stuff and then says, is what has just put him in the Killjoy Hall of Fame, right? So, okay, so that's my place in the world. With respect to this, he does say that I do other things that are much more interesting and fun. So look, it keeps going. I'm in this one. We've got a whole team of people now, and this is people from all parts of the spectrum, right? So Van Savage, I told him when he was a particle physicist, graduate student in about 2000, at Santa Fe Institute in the courtyard there, that it's all wrong, but he went on to publish all sorts of things, and now he has all sorts of papers that say it's right and wrong, and we don't know. Chuck Price is now over in Western Australia. Josh is my, he's at Georgia Tech. He's one of my original collaborators from MIT. So this is just a whole bunch of different people here. Nicholas was the one who had the density of population density scaling in an interesting way. So this is ecology latest. We'll see. This is a big paper that says, it's kind of a mess, right? Again. And then I wanted to, let me see, is this going to be the last? Yeah. Well, there's a conclusion. But I wanted to show you this paper. This appeared in Science last year. I think I have that right. Yeah, it was 2012. It's just crazy, but it sort of brings in, in some ways a nice conclusion to the madness of all of these things because it links in everything. So they have this 2-page little strange diatribe saying that power laws are sort of everywhere, but they're always measured badly, and there are no mechanisms, and I mean there is turbulence, for example. Let's go back to StatMech, and we'll go to turbulence, and there are beautiful stories everywhere. It's a ubiquitous thing. I think they're kind of mad at the scale-free network stuff. I don't know. But they have this ridiculous plot, which is an opinion plot. This is in Science. Well, they call it a chart. Okay, so maybe that. Does it say figure 1? It says it's a chart. And so these are, their claims about the mechanistic sophistication of the, modeling and so on that people have supplied to understand the structures, whatever it is, and it's not just networks, it's kind of everything. And then this is the statistical evidence. So fantastically, they have allometric scaling up there. They're like, it's just great, it's fantastic. Have you read that paper? It's really good. And I don't think they have, because it takes a lot, it's a very painful thing to do. It should be here, and they put Zipf's law for some reason, and then these other dots are just suggestions of where other theories are. What is going on? There was some blowback in the, Barabazi wrote something. People are like, oh my God, are you kidding? I mean, we know that measuring these things are hard. Yes, and they're not all power laws, and we've argued about those things. But there are, so they have a story where they go on about the central limit theorem, of course, which I've talked about, right? Fantastic thing, works, it's great, we've got it. And there's just the one beautiful story. But then they do touch on this other aspect, which is the stable distribution idea. Okay, so if you have distributions with finite variance and you sample from them and you add all these guys up, that's when you get the bell curve, right? But if the distributions have heavy tails themselves, then the overall one will have a heavy tail. And you get there's a nice little spectrum of those. It's a very beautiful, beautiful theory. But it's a generalization of the central limit theorem. But it's absolutely plu-plu, right? The power law in, power law out story, right? So you have to be sampling in some way that's non-trivial to get these power laws out. So that's a disaster. That is just an amazing disaster. I can't believe it. I mean, I can't believe this appeared. I think I'll be meeting Porter next in May, so we'll have a discussion about it. But I don't know what to say. This is just nuts. And, you know, I mean, look, I think anyone would say you're not allowed to make. This is something the New York. So we had one of our pieces of work on you know, happiness that got a lot of press. The New York Post. New York Post produced a plot with happy and smiley faces all over New York City, the region, which had nothing to do with our results. They just made them up. And then it ended up that Times Square, they've had a big smiley face on Times Square, and it's like, that was the story. Times Square is the happiest place. And then an ad company took off with it and had a billboard running for the couple of days there around the news of this, that you get a free trip to Jamaica or something, or it was some weird, and it had, at the bottom it had, you know, research done by University of Vermont, blah, blah, blah. It's like a billboard in Times Square. I'm like, what are you doing? But they totally made up this plot. It was really spectacular. It really was. I mean, we didn't say any of these things, but it was, well, you know, it was a map with smiley faces, and there's sad faces in Queens, and obviously New Jersey. But no evidence for it whatsoever. Anyway, well played. So that's sort of, you know, that's the New York Post, and they're allowed to do that. That's fine. Hopefully, but this is nuts. I don't know how. I mean, what is this axis? What is this? It's just there. It's an opinion figure. Wow. All right. So it goes on. I mean, look. I mean, no one disputes that it's a messy business, and but these heavy tail distributions are all over the place, and scaling, you know, this allometric scaling all over the place. The details are complicated, but and there are all sorts of different mechanisms that give rise to all sorts of different overall patterns. That's the game. That's just how it's turned out with this, you know, these size distributions and scaling. There are specific stories for specific kinds of patterns. Nevertheless, there's still universality, right? So there's still the fact that some of these mechanisms are much more common than others, and I don't think that's been sorted out. So we've talked about the random aggregation model of Simon. Fantastic thing. And that does seem to happen over and over again, right? We do have evidence of that. And it's appealing, right? It's got a fairly easy to kind of understand, easy to imagine it happening kind of story, which doesn't mean it's correct. But you can see that one might have more of a ubiquity. So it would be fantastic if there's a parallel size distribution of parallel size distribution mechanisms, right? So that the commonality that right, okay, all right. Too much? Yeah. Probably is, though. I'm sure there is. There are some mechanisms that just dominate, giving you these kinds of things, and there are some other obscure ones that do, you know, there's some crazy ones in StatMech that give you particular kinds of things, and that's it. Possibly dreamed up by humans and never actually manifested, but there are real ones. So the summary of that is, wow. The conclusion for all of this is this geometric argument really took, I mean, it took, honestly, 10 years to sort this out. And it's still not generally accepted, of course. So dimensional analysis makes sense. However, it's still a network story. So you could just make a simple, well, it's just dimensional analysis. But there is a much more beautiful story based on networks, which really starts, with West et al. That's a fantastic contribution. We do have this. Isometrically growing regions are more readily supplied. They're more easily supplied, or better supplied, if you like. You can do a better job with supplying them than allometrically growing ones. That's a nice observation. It's not on this, and I guess I should put it up, but the way surface area scales, if you have an isometric thing, say 3 dimensions, the surface area scaling is r squared, right? If r is your typical length scale. And if it's, let me get this right. So if it's allometrically scaling, you actually get a different thing. You get gamma min becomes involved, in fact. The minimum scaling exponent becomes involved. So that's another, I should put that up. Anyway, so it's a different game. We'll do that. All right. So it matters if you've got a network or a volume being serviced that's in a greater, in a higher dimensional space. That's a big deal. So that's an important thing to point out. if you have deviations from this optimal scaling, it suggests that something else is going on. Maybe it's gravity for organisms, right? Something's happening as you get bigger, right? It's harder to walk around. And it could be, of course, geology for these big stories for big networks, river networks. The details of the networks might not matter, and it's especially important, I think, for biological ones, because you just get the job done, right? You have some nice fractal behavior. It achieves what you want. It doesn't have to be absolutely spectacular. 2/3 is hanging around, possibly in hiding somewhere in, I don't know what's going on with it. So I'm going to say it's a mistrial. And so we kind of had a sort of a Star Wars theme. We went back to trying to go back to Law and Order. It's not working. OK. So we'll get there, hopefully. I mean, science is supposed to be about getting to the truth, right? Or funding, or being famous. So you don't want it to tip too far that way. All right. So and then there are about 15 pages of references, which I'm sure you'll want to look at. All right. Good. OK. You guys are going to have to sort this out later on. I hope no one's allergic to almonds. So I'm going to start this piece. Yeah, I'm going to start this piece. There's some very nice things in here. Again, it's we're getting towards the end of the semester, so I'll touch on things. I'm not going to. Right. We're done with assignments. So I should say, yeah, we'll have our final presentations in the exam slot, which I think is May 7th. I have to look that up. I'll send an email, correct? Because you have a flight booked at 9 p.m. that night. And so it'll be the same kind of thing, but it's 2.5 hours, that slot. So, again, maybe 4-minute pieces, but the idea is to present something that has happened since the initial part. And given that, everyone knows what you're talking about now, you can presume that. So it's, again, a small piece, but it's, again, that kind of nutshell thing. So you're not presenting a thesis. All right. OK. So hopefully I don't have any. Yeah, winning, it's not for everyone. Right? Although there is the everyone gets a medal story, and I don't know. It's not really right. Yes, you're a terrific singer. My mother never said that. Correctly. OK, so yes, winning. All right. So let's look at, so I want to look at social success. And I will have this kind of summary piece after this, which connects back into contagion and so on. And it's sort of a distillation of a whole bunch of things. But this is building towards a particular, this sequence of slides. We'll talk about an experiment that we ran. It was published in Science in 2006. Matt Salganic was the lead character. It was his PhD thesis. He's now at Princeton. And it's, well, we'll get to it. But it's about why do things take off, right? And we have all sorts of reasons for that. And I'll come to that in the next piece, which I'll call contagious stories. So economists are interested in this, sort of obviously dabbling on the side of doing real economics. They're sort of wondering about, but it's a bit of a mystery, right? So why, why do some of these people take off cultural objects, why are they so famous? So this is looking back in time at what people have done. So there's Rosen from 981, and it's, economics of superstars. Let's see. So points out that there aren't many people who get paid to do some of these jobs. I mean, look at golf, for example, which ridiculous game. But the top, really, good walk spoiled. That was Mark Twain, right? So there aren't many golfers. There aren't many tennis players that really can survive that well. You get out of the top couple of 100 and it's hard. Soloists in classical music, usually they have other jobs, right? They have other jobs. Economic textbooks, oh my God. Anyway, these are the 3 examples, right? So why do some of these things take off? And so here's the, so it's highly skewed distributions. So there are full-time comedians, but the ones that are earning the most are, one is in first place is earning a lot more than the one in 150th place. I mean, are they that much better, is the question. Surgeons, similar kind of thing. So this was the argument that Rosen came up with, is that there is underlying quality, right? So there's an underlying quality which is in principle sort of measurable for whatever we're talking about. But it's an intrinsic quality. So it's just a bit of a funny thing. So then there's just simply this argument that, I love these words, right? It's convex. The rewards for quality, given some innate quality as you grow through your career, is a convex function. And so it gives two reasons for that. So there's imperfect substitution. So you don't want to take one good surgeon and replace them by 10, like one fantastic surgeon and replace them by 10 kind of handy ones. It feels bad, right? So you tend to go to the, move up to the better one, and they get more rewards as a result. And then technology, right? So of course, and this has been around really for hundreds of years, obviously, but even it keeps growing astronomically. It's easy to reproduce the output of certainly some people. I mean, surgeons, I don't know, right? You have a robot that's programmed, right, okay, that's not gonna, I'm sure Josh Bongard is probably trying to figure out how to do that, right? Okay. So you can replicate yourself, and Oprah can be Oprah to everyone, yeah? Right? It'd be very hard if you had to actually go there and see it happen. It's not a public good. It's more of you can have joint consumption because you can replicate the thing, whatever it is. And maybe it's just stories, I mean, something like the Mona Lisa is a good example because we kind of just replicate the story of that one. Some people will go to see it, but not many, as we've talked about. And then there's no social construction here, right? Fair enough. There's no sense of, I mean, there's some social in that people are, going to the better surgeons or whatever, and they're choosing things, but there's not an interaction between people about things. Well, yeah. But basically the story, I mean, there is implied a little bit, but basically the story is the social aspect of it will sort itself out, that people will vote perfectly, right? They assess things perfectly. And if you've got a bigger queue than someone else, you will do better. And it's growing superlinearly. There's another work from back around that time, Adler, which is quite different, and poses the question: well, what if everything in this list, this ensemble of objects or people, whatever it is, have an equal inherent quality, that they're all the same? So how does that get spread out? So then this is a purely social thing, right? So then this is a reasonable thing. So that people like to be coordinated in their knowledge, culture, and so on. So you start, you want to have some similarity. Sounds like a terrible thing for an economist to say, right? No? Must be a sociologist. So then success is purely a social construction, right? Because they're not differentiable in any sense by whatever this inherent quality is, however you measure that. How do you measure that? What's the inherent quality of a song? People do, of course, try to find that out, right? So you get a movie, and they'll break it down by scenes and so on, or they'll take songs and look at its, fast Fourier transform or something like that, and try to find. And some people will say, well, we've got the magic solution. Like we have we'll diagnose your thing, and we'll tell you how to make it sell better. Big problem is, so how do we do that? How do we measure inherent quality? And there's a lot of snake oil. This is fantastic. I mean, if you can do it, of course, if you can predict what's going to take off, then there's a lot of money coming your way. Advertisers have a lot of trouble, and I'll come back to that in various ways. Right. So I'll point you to a couple of more recent pieces. So this is Bernardo Huberman, who's done a very famous guy. He's done a lot of fantastic work on social phenomena, particularly in the web age, right? So has this one particular study, which I guess it's not linked to, but so the claim is that if you have something where you can make easy decisions about something, so this is not whether you really like this music. I mean, this is something where you just say yes, no. So this is a kind of an opinion site. I don't know if it still exists, but Jite.com. People, you just have to say yes, no about something. Someone asks a question or poses something, you just say yes, no. So the claim is for that you get bandwagoning. The people, they're not invested too much. If they see lots of yeses and they're there already, they're just like, okay, yeah, right. And it grows like that. Whereas something where it costs more, there's more effort, you'll be maybe evaluated later on. This is something that is a reflection of you. And they use Amazon as an example. And I think what they did was they took the first 20 reviews for a whole bunch of products, probably books, but the first 20, and looked at how they behave, right? So if you get a lot of 5s at the start, then it turns out you start to get an oppositional voice come in. And so I think I reviewed this paper actually. So one of the problems with this is that you can't be sure. There's a self-selection problem that could be occurring, right? So if you see all these 5s, and you've just read the Da Vinci Code, and you know it's a piece of garbage, right? So you want to tell them, like, don't listen to those maniacs. They're obviously all fanboys, or they're friends, or they were paid, or something. You need to, there's merit. Whereas if you think, yeah, I love it, then you're not so motivated to just add the same thing. So you can have that argument, and it's hard. That's very hard to get at. But generally speaking, this kind of observation that there is maybe more bandwagon involved with something that's a low cost to something where there is cost. I mean, Amazon, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how this works. I mean, people tend to write pretty long reviews on Amazon. They tend to kind of get into it, I don't know. Right? I mean, is that just, what's going on with that? I actually don't know. I really don't know why. Is it just sort of kind of the culture of the thing, or do they get dinged if they just say it was good or something? Please write 500 words.
Well, Amazon actually turned it into like some
Do you know?
competition where like you can get
well, there's that.
1,000 review top 500, and then they actually give you free stuff for a review.
So that's really tangled up. And of course, even outside of Amazon, you get the people. So if you're in the top 10, stuff just arrives at your door. Independent of Amazon's. Hey, like, here's a free thing. Which is bad. Yeah, good for the person who. Yeah, so it's amazing how much some of these people. I mean, maybe it's a team of people. I don't know. The top 10 ones. They're just reviewing things like crazy. Yeah. So that's true. They did turn it into a game. But I think it's kind of there's a lot of reviews presumably where you put up one review. This is just something you know a lot about. It's one of these heavy-tail distribution stories again. This is a thing you're really into. It totally sucked, and you really need to tell the world all about it. You're an expert about it. You're into snorkels or something. And it's just like about snorkels. You need to tell them. All right, this is the best snorkel. I don't know about other things. All right. So that's a bit of a funny part of it, but this is getting at the social story. How much people follow each other and how they react to each other. It's great data, of course. This is a kind of actually somewhat mathematical piece coming out of I think it's a French-based pair. And I'm just going to throw it up here. But the idea is instead of having voting where you say, I want A or B, right? So presidential voting, like this one or this one. Instead, giving them scores, right? So you give, you give these two candidates a 10 each if you want it, like it's out of 10, or whatever it's out of, or a 0 and a 1, whatever. So you get to impart more information essentially, which is what's done with wine, rankings of wine, rankings of skating competitions, right? When you get all sorts of problems with judges colluding and going on, but you give individual, diving and so on, you give individual scores and you average them. You maybe throw out the outliers. So rather than saying this one's the best one, you get to impart more information. And so they have a whole, as it says, a theory for saying why this works better. So you get around the Arrow's paradox, so there's a famous problem in voting if you have ranking. So it's different to ranking as well. So instead of saying you prefer A over B over C, which is one way to do it, you say, all right, I'm going to give them one, and this is often done. You give A a 7, and B is a 5, and C is a 0, right? That's what you think about them. Like you wouldn't be unhappy with, you're not thrilled by this one if it's out of 10. It's out of a million. No, it's out of 10. You wouldn't be, this one's okay? You're going to give them something? B is, okay, it's not a disaster for you, but you really don't like this one, right? You're imparting more information. That's lost. It is in here, obviously, but you've reduced the amount of information conveyed. One thing that can happen with this, if you're giving, and so this is a famous paradox, that you can get collectively that A is greater than B, is greater than C, is greater than A. You can get that. You can contrive examples. I think say contrived. I think that's not a reason. But it's just possible.
That happens in winner-take-all systems, doesn't it? Like that's how Margaret Thatcher gets elected. You know, because if you split votes, you end up with a minority control.
Oh, if you have.
Similarly, Canada's current system is set up that way too. They have the same problem where if you have like certain blocks split multiple ways,
Yeah.
then you can end up with the block that would lose to all the other blocks that may be similar, but
Because they're fractured, the other ones are fractured. Yeah, right. So if you take a way to get around that, right, is then you have to. Well, in Australia, it's very common actually. You have instant runoff type structures, right? So you take the one that came last and you throw them away, and then you look at it again. So it prevents that one cohesive block that maybe has 5% of the votes and wants to invade Poland, and from taking over. I think there is a rule in Germany about that. Like you have to get 3 to 4. Do we talk about 3 of some percentage of votes before you can get in, which is not. And Italy has different rules, so you have like 10 different. They can do well, right? And the structure of say the U.S. is that 2 parties really dominate. It's hard to see it changing, but Italy, you have a whole, tons of them, right? You have all these different groups, and they can kind of combine in different ways. But it's sort of the structure of the way. It's a result of the way things are voted. Yeah, I mean, a great problem. I mean, there's some beautiful stuff recently. Maybe some of you saw this, where essentially there's kind of an effort to build kind of a cryptographic version of voting. So you want a voting system that's the extra part is I'm going to add is hard, but it's not gameable, right? So you can't easily game it, and it's fair. Like it realizes somehow you have to figure out people will generally vote their true intentions, and sort of if you go from what their real preferences are to the outcome, you do well, right? Was this passed around properly?
Yeah.
You give it another go. You can send it around, the humans.
Who got last? I want to give it to them for making bold guesses.
That's all right. We can just consume at will. Oh, Cody gets a bonus because he made Neptune as big as the solar system.
It's yours.
No, that's okay.
No, I want you to have it.
Just keep eating it. That's what. It's like little bits of happiness. We'll distribute the joy. How about that? My gosh, what was I saying? Please. Yeah, right. So you want this thing, it's not game, what was that? How we were going to end the lecture. That it's not, I mean, you can game anything, but you can make it computationally basically impossible, right? So that's what you want. But there's a third piece, which is a mixture of, let's just say legitimacy, right? So that's how to say. So instant runoff was here in Burlington for a while, but didn't sort of perform well, like in a sense that the person who in one of the elections came first in the first round didn't win ultimately. So that doesn't feel right, which is, that's understandable. But, and then it was voted out, so it's gone. But if you've had enough experience with it for a long enough time, you see, generally speaking, it does a good job, and it's safe. You don't have to run the election again, so that's a big deal. And you get to put in all your versions of things. All right. Let me tell you just about a few more, and then I think on Tuesday I'll tell you about this experiment. But I just want to give you some point to some of the work that's been done. So this is similar to some of the original piece that I showed you there from economics. So you give an n. So this is just a nice kind of a calculable thing. It's just sort of a physicist going crazy thing, right? So n objects, they have some underlying quality Q, right, which you can assess. And then people's evaluation of them is a bit errant, though, right? So it's some random variable, and you could, have some normal distribution or something like that, with the mean being the actual quality, right? So you can vary that width and so on. And for some sort of general collection of error, if you like, error estimates, then you can show a couple of interesting results. So there's the evaluation is going to have an error, and then there's the probability that you evaluate something. So there's two pieces, right? So one is that you evaluate the object based on what its vote count is now to some power alpha, or what its vote count now is with its actual inherent quality in front of it. So that gives it a little extra boost. So this is an interesting thing. So the idea is, what happens with top 10 type structures, right? So if things are piling out to the front, you've got some sorting thing and you want to see which ones have been voted the highest, right? Which is a very natural thing to do with lots of lists online where we do that all the time. So they have this nice observation. If this scaling is less than 1, so the probability that you will look at an object, right? It's sublinear. It's proportional to a sublinear power of growth with its existing votes. Then the ordering gets sorted out. You will actually get the underlying quality. You get the orders that you get. This audience or crowd evaluating these objects will get the objects in order of their underlying quality. Again, assuming underlying quality. So there's some mechanism for how you see these things, right? It's through a web interface. It's through how other people tell you about them. There's something that, this is obviously a stylized story, but there's something about that, right? So if it's sublinear, if you're actually, well, what's the way to say it? If you're not, they're not getting they're getting a boost, obviously, right? It's going up with the number of votes. That puts it in front of you, in a sense. But not too, there's sort of a diminishing returns, if you like. That's it, I suppose. Then you'll get the correct quality. Now, if alpha is greater than 1, so it's starting to take off, then you get, some objects are just simply never even seen, and of course you don't end up with the right ranking. Right? So the thing breaks down. Now, there could be all sorts of other ways, again, as I said, how this probability relates to the whole system, probably of looking at an object. I mean, what's the chance you walk into a book? What's the chance you walk into a book? That you're actually, right? 0, I suppose. But, and you pick up a particular book, right? It's because other people voted for that book or that particular kind of clothing. You see it in the clothing store. So it's a nice distillation of a very general thing that happens. You see people with skateboards. You're like, okay, I'll go and vote on a skateboard. So that's nice. It's really related to both of the approaches that we had at the start. Nice result. Okay, so that's just a good thing to know about. I'll tell you about pecking orders for fish on Tuesday, because this is a fun thing, and that will build into our experiment. But basically, yeah, you can do some interesting tests because fish forget. All right. Tuesday.